Good morning, good afternoon, good any time of day and night, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to have you join us here today for this second event that we have organized here on behalf of or actually at the occasion of the UN 75th birthday. It's our second Geneva talk. Today we will talk about how we want to chart international collaboration in the digital age. This is actually a series of talks that we're kickstarting here called Geneva Talks, and they are a collaboration between Swissnex San Francisco. So I am Joya, I'm the CEO of Swissnex San Francisco, the Consulate General of Switzerland in San Francisco, and the Republic and Canton of Geneva. These talks are inspired by the conviction that technology is key to the future of humanity. And these talks explore the symbiotic relationship between technology and humanity, trying to bring together the worlds of Geneva and the Silicon Valley Bay Area. So today, we actually are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the creation of the United Nations. This was happening during a time when the world was recovering from 2 world wars, and the governments of 50 countries came together in San Francisco, where I am located here, to establish the United Nations. Of course, the UN today is not the UN of 1945, and the organization has seen many ups and downs, and we know that many have talked about a big crisis that the UN system is in. In the middle of this, actually, Geneva is the seat and the host to many UN and other multilateral organizations. And every day, key decisions are taken in Geneva that save or improve people's lives. And often we actually don't know about it. The international media's headlines might not talk about it, but they do make a crucial difference in all of our lives. Geneva is a very dynamic and lively ecosystem. We have 38 international organizations there, over 400 nonprofit organizations, NGOs, and 179 permanent missions. But also regular life, and we have companies and universities there. So it's a truly unique combination of stakeholders that work together to improve the state of the world across the fields of human rights, environment, trade, health, humanitarian sector, digital policy, pretty much any sector of life you can think of. So we find ourselves today in the middle of a crisis, COVID-19, which has transformed our daily lives, and it has also highlighted just how interconnected the world has become. And it has accelerated the pace of change in areas such as digital transformation and also the emergence of new technology. So this is a very special moment to celebrate and commemorate the 75 years of the UN, and to actually start looking forward and say, okay, where are we heading from here? What will international collaboration look like in this digital age? What would it have looked like if it had been created today? And this is the kind of conversation we are here to share with you today. And we're really happy that you all signed up for this interactive workshop today. A few technical pieces of information before we move on. So we have actually a chat function here on the bottom of your screen. You are invited to add any comments or questions in there. So we will have a little bit of a separate parallel conversation happening there in the next half hour. And we will have one of our team members, Nicola Ruffo, monitoring that, and he will then bring this into the conversation with our panelists in about 20 minutes. Please also note that this session is being recorded, so we hope that you all agree to that. We will start off now with a 30-minute panel, and it will be followed by a 30-minute long breakout session. So we have 2 breakout sessions which you signed up for. They're workshops that are being coordinated and hosted by our 2 partner organizations here today, the DiploFoundation Geneva Internet Platform with Teresa and Pavlina, and ICT for Peace with Anne-Marie. We will then come back together for another about 15 minutes of closing, and I will share with you a Mentimeter where you are invited to add a few thoughts and answers to a question we'll be asking, and we will look at that word cloud to close the event today. So now, with no further ado, let me pass the word on to our moderator today, Professor Jovan Kurbalija. He is the founding director of the DiploFoundation and head of the Internet platform and a Geneva Internet platform. And he's a former diplomat, but he has a professional academic background in international law, diplomacy, and IT, and he has been a pioneer in the field of cyber diplomacy since 1992. So he really has seen a lot in that field. With the Geneva Internet platform has really moved forward the conversation around how technology and the world and humanity can interact together. And he will be leading today's panel discussion with our two distinguished speakers, which I will let him introduce to you. Word on to you, Jovan. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Joya. It's great to be today with you on trying to describe and discuss this interplay between technology and humanity. And it is a unique moment, as you indicated, with the crisis time, but also with the celebration of 75th birthday of the United Nations. Time to reflect on the past, but even more to see what is ahead of us. And COVID-19 crisis definitely accelerated the latest developments. Before I introduce our panelists who will shed more light on this interplay between international governance, business, technology, and humanity, let me just give you a quick tour, literally geographical tour. If we move from the lovely space of the Swissnex in San Francisco, almost 3 kilometers, we come to the Hearst Theater, where the Charter of the United Nations was signed. And if you just move a bit around, you come to the current setup where the most of technical industry is concentrated, either the so-called old digital industry south of San Francisco or new digital industry in San Francisco. If you take the flight of almost 11,000 miles across the United States, across the Atlantic, you come to Geneva. And Geneva is the place, as we indicated, where the technology meets humanity. If you analyze the history of more or less all Geneva-based organizations, starting from the International Red Cross, Committee on Red Cross, or International Telecommunication Union, International Labor Organization, and most of the UN specialized agencies, you will always see elements of technology and elements of that negotiations between technology and humanity. How to accommodate breakthroughs in technology into the core needs of humanity, society, politics, economy. And what we are currently doing, we're in a way coming back to our predecessors have been doing for centuries, and 75 years ago in San Francisco, we are informally negotiating the digital social contract. We are trying to see what will be the core principles, core values, relying obviously on the UN Charter and core documents, and how we can chart the road ahead of us. COVID-19 crisis accelerated this discussion, and this is what we will be basically focusing on today. Now, we have today, and I will get back to the building where I'm based, the World Meteorological Organizations in Geneva with this background, and come back to the session itself. Today with us, we have two really unique and interesting speakers who will shed light on this interplay between science and technology and humanity. We have with us Michael Mullen. I'm sure that most of you know Michael as an innovator in the global governance, former Director General of the UN office in Geneva, currently the chairman of Diplomatic Forum at the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator. His CV is very long, but it's available on the online. But what is unique in Michael's work at the UN was always this attempt to see issues from different perspectives and to experiment and to innovate. And he was in the UN for a long time now. He's slightly outside, therefore he will bring us these two perspectives. Together with Michael, we have here Karin Schwab. Karin is Vice President and Deputy General Counsel for eBay Global Products and Technology Organizations. Again, unique blend of experience in business, technology, and very diverse academic and professional background from Switzerland, from the city of Fribourg, which is well known for bilingual culture and very intercultural discussion. And later on, Karin's career moved towards tech, business, financial sector. Therefore, what we are going to ask Michael and Karin is to reflect on this interplay, unique interplay, and in particular, what is ahead of us. Michael more focusing on science and technology and governance and humanity, and Karin focusing on the question of business and interplay, how this interplay between business and humanity and technology can shape smoother developments in the future and enabling technological and economic development. Michael, the floor is yours. Floor or mic, whatever we call it.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jovan, and hello, everyone. I'm happy to be with you today. Before I go into the substance of it, let me just make a point that kind of synthesizes or it puts in very simple words what both Joya and Jovan said about Geneva. It's the operational center of the international system. And every single person on this planet, every single of all of us, whatever we are, 8 billion today, is touched every single day throughout their lives and throughout their day by something that emanates from this town. It sounds like we're bragging, but it's actually fact. Every single one of you, from the moment you wake up till you go to bed, is impacted in your daily life in ways that you don't even think about anymore, that you take for granted. But the fact is that in small things throughout your day, your lives would be very, very different if the construct we created after the Second World War, the international system with the UN at its heart, did not exist. We have reached a level of well-being for humankind in the last 75 years because of that structure that we've never seen before. So that's on the one hand. Now, science and technology has always been part of it. It's not as if we suddenly wake up and now discover science and technology and decide, oh, we need to integrate it into the way we do work. But the fact is that the pace of change and the pace of progress is so fast right now, on the one hand. The size of the problems that we have to deal with, not just the international system, but all of us, every single one of us, are of a massive existential nature. So the challenges are huge. The tools are developing very fast. And we have some structures and government, including in governments, that have a hard time adapting fast enough to these changes and to these developments. And if there's one thing that is very clear, it is that unless we work together in ways that we've never done before, we are not going to make it. And this is where this new nexus between Silicon Valley and Geneva comes in. And it is now reached a stage where it's not just a nice to have, it's an imperative. We're going to have to figure out ways of adapting, of understanding each other. These are two constituencies or two tribes that don't speak normally to each other very much, whose language is very different. And this is where we come in as a kind of a translator, and in some cases as a dating agency, if you want, where we bring them together, people together who don't know each other. I think it's an imperative now to make sure that we integrate science in a way that we haven't done before. If anything, this pandemic we live in now has done several things. One thing is that it has shown the absolute necessity of working together. Many of our leaders haven't quite gotten the memo yet, but it's a fact. And the other thing it has shown is what I just said, which is that science is back in our lives with a vengeance, and will be and is an important element in making sure that we will be able to shape our future rather than let the future shape us. So what I just mentioned to you, the sort of reality of what this ecosystem that we have here and the impact it has in people's lives. Most of us don't know that, and most of us take whatever happens to us in our daily lives for granted. On the other hand, you have Silicon Valley, and I remind you of the fact that just I think it's 2 years ago, when the head of Microsoft came here and suggested that we needed a Geneva Digital Convention. The fact that translated means that the technology firms have realized that they're really good at the technology stuff, but that they need some help with how to govern it and how to make sure that the ethics are built into it, how to make sure that whatever we do is based on human rights principles that we have worked on for so long. And there is therefore a really quite natural fit, if you want, between Silicon Valley and the actors there and the actors here in Geneva. And when I say the actors here in Geneva, that comes back to what something Karen will speak about, I'm not just talking about the UN or the NGOs as our partners, but also the business community, the academic community, the civil society. And I bring that in, I underline that very much so, because this situates itself beyond the immediate topic, sort of fairly narrow topic, into the way that we are now experiencing a transition in governance. The way we run our planet, the way we run our affairs, both at the international level, at the national, regional, communal, is also in great transition. A lot of people talk about the crisis of multilateralism. I don't like using that word because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I certainly agree that we are in a very big transition in multilateralism in the way that we govern ourselves. We are moving from a state-centric system where the state had the monopoly of power and the monopoly of impact, if you want, on the citizens, to a system where we are many different actors around the decision-making tables who are going to have to work together as they haven't before, as I said before. And this means a multilateralism that is more collaborative, more integrated, more networked, less siloed, and that organizes itself more in a matrix kind of system than in the kind of system that we've had for the past 75 years. When we speak about the UN, and we don't need to go too deep into that, but we have a system that was created by government 75 years ago in their own image. So completely siloed. You go to any government still today, and most of them, you see ministries not talking to each other and not really coordinating the impact of the work so that they have a greater impact. And it's exactly the same in our system, where you have a degree of individualism, if you want, that is no longer tenable. And we're seeing a change, very rapid, and we're seeing that change particularly here in Geneva, where the collaborative gene has suddenly flourished, and where you're seeing collaborations and readiness to work and to share information, leverage each other's expertise and knowledge and money to an extent that we haven't seen before. Again, not just within the UN system and its partners, but also with business and with the academic world and with civil society in general. So we have a very interesting new reality that we are now injecting this conversation into. And I think it's important that we have these conversations, because it's important that each one of us who works in one way or the other in this business, take part and take a responsibility in making sure that evolution goes in the right direction. There's enough people out there trying to figure out ways of breaking up the system, of going each their own way, of thinking that they can solve the problems of the world on their own alone. That's not going to work. But we do need to find ways of collaborating and of having not only the conversation, but also figuring out a way of translating these conversations into actions that will make sure that we end up with the right structures and with the right tools. Just the last word, because I speak too long, but I'll give you an example of how the Geneva ecosystem evolves and is evolving very quickly. Jovan mentioned that I'm working in something called the Geneva Science and Technology Anticipator, and it is precisely an operationalized example of what we're trying to do here. Our task is to put together cutting-edge science with the operators of diplomacy writ large. In other words, people who work in development, in the health sector, in the humanitarian sector, in all of the aspects of a human life where we have mandates, where the system has mandates to go out and make the life better for our brothers and sisters out there. And putting together these two communities to sit down and agree on which of the sciences and the technologies that are sort of being worked on are bubbling in the pots of laboratories around the world, and extract from them the most promising, and then agree between two communities that do not have the same language to which are the best ones to turn into the best tools to give to these operators on the ground, so that humanity is going to be better off and we are going to help them move on. It's moving very quickly. And the interesting aspect of it is that there is completely uniform acceptance and enthusiasm for this initiative. It doesn't matter whether you talk to scientists who suddenly see a funnel in front of them where they can push their research, and at the other end they will see a very operational tool come out that will actually have an impact on people's lives. International organizations that of course are happy that they can upgrade their technological access to technology. Governments who can see very clearly that this will help their citizens on the ground. And even the money is happy. Big foundations are coming with the money. We almost don't need to ask for it, which not quite, I'm exaggerating, but still. So it's a really quite an exciting aspect of it. And this situates itself in another reality here in Geneva, where you see that there's an enormous amount of the global conversations on cyber, on digital, on cybersecurity, on how we govern it, on the ethics of it, are happening here in this town. I would say that over 50% of these global conversations are happening here. And Joan, of course, is a very major actor in those conversations. So there is some very clear synergies that just needs to be structured, helped along, encouraged, and made known that we need to work on. I'll stop here.
Michael, just here is one illustration of what you just said, challenge of in communication between different communities, and trying to reduce lost in translation between, in this case, IT community and policy community, or diplomatic community. I'm sure that after today's discussion, we will make the straighter lines between A and B in all discussions. And this is a lovely segue to the Karin's intervention. Karin, being originally from Switzerland, but also working a lot in the United States, has been crossing different boundaries, professional, cultural, and others. Karin, could you bring us more insights on this role of business and this interplay between business, humanity, technology, and maybe some reflections on reducing lost in translation between businessmen, diplomats, and technologists? Over to you, Karin.
Sure, thanks so much, Johan, and thanks everybody for having me this morning or afternoon. As people said, I actually am from Switzerland, but I moved to the Bay Area over 7 years ago. So I'm sort of the personification of that bridge between close to the Lac Léman and now in Silicon Valley. So super happy to have a chance to share a few thoughts from my end. So one of the things that is making the Bay Area so special and the companies that operate here is that most of us really take a global approach. We operate globally, and that doesn't mean that we just have production places across the world or supply chain that is global, but our business is global. We are in the business of cross-border transaction, of cross-border information exchange, etc. So our business model is very different from how the world is organized. And I think that's sort of the fundamental tension that we're talking about, that we have in today's world, where how the world is organized and what's actually happening in real life are sort of not necessarily matching anymore. And we need help to bridge that. And I think that's exactly sort of at the heart of the conversation today. For us, it has been always super critical to work in collaboration with multiple stakeholders and people that can help us solve big, hairy problems. And those problems, as we all know, they're the same across the globe, right? Like right now, things like privacy, product safety, intellectual property rights, even things like tax are on everybody's mind, and they need to be solved in a way that is practical and effective. And if we take a view that is unfortunately a bit the trend that we're seeing in today's world, where states are becoming way more nationalistic, and I think COVID is a great example where we saw that in a moment of crisis, a lot of states just focus on themselves, and we sort of lose that really kind of global thinking. That's a concern, because as Michael said, we were not going to be able to solve the big problems that are ahead of us if we take that kind of approach. So from the perspective of a business that operates globally, we have always and will continue to put a lot of emphasis on helping to find solutions. I have a couple of examples that I can share with you, and I'm happy to go into more detail of any of those if there are questions. But I just thought it's helpful to bring to life like what it really means. So the first example that I wanted to share is around product safety. A big topic for us. A lot of people sell a lot of things on eBay, and there is stuff that potentially is not safe for consumption. So how do we deal with that? If you take a very sort of policy-driven approach, you would say like, yes, the platform and the marketplaces just need to make sure that nothing that creates any risk is sold on their site. Everybody would agree, like very conceptually and super high level with that statement. The problem is once you really dig deeper and once you really ask like, okay, what does that really mean? You start to run into a lot of issues because it's not that easy and straightforward. So eBay has, many years ago, we started to implement a very specific action plan on what we do for product safety. We were then contacted by the EU Commission, who wanted to talk to us about our initiatives, and we shared sort of a 12-step plan with them. They were really inspired by what we did, and it ended up becoming a thing called the Product Safety Pledge, which the EU Commission forced the other big players like Alibaba and Amazon to also adopt. And it has now, since implementation, it has been adopted by many, many other international marketplaces. The interesting thing is, obviously, the European Union already has a big scope, and that already makes a huge difference. But where the magic happens is that now Australia reached out to the European Union and said like, hey, what are you doing there? We heard that there's something great happening. And they're now thinking about adopting exactly the same approach. So it sort of becomes this thing that has a life of its own and is really practical and rooted in very specific and concrete actions that companies can take to make a difference there. Another example would be all our effort to end wildlife trafficking. Lots of international organizations have come together. That's something that would never have happened if states just tried to regulate that. eBay banned ivory sales over 10 years ago, and we've led the chart there. But bringing all those stakeholders together, letting the policy side talk about kind of what they're trying to solve for, and then work with the people that are actually sort of rooted in how we're going to implement those goals and make the solution super practical is critical. Now, I think that the challenge, and maybe as we try to look forward and what's needed in the future, I think there are two things that come to mind. One is speed. We need to get faster at those things, and focus. We should really identify the key problems where we want to emphasize and solve, and put out all our resources on a few instead of trying to do a lot of things that we just can't reasonably pull off.
Thank you, Karen, for bringing these few keywords, speed, focus, product safety pledge. There is an interesting initiative in Geneva, just to connect the dots. This is probably metaphor, which is the title is Geneva Dialogue on the product safety, digital product safety, and it's supported by Confederation, and that could also connect the dots in this important mosaic. Now, I managed to negotiate with Joya and our Swiss host, which wasn't easy, 5 extra minutes, which is great success. My persuasion skills are amazing. And to convince Swiss to go over the time, it's something. Therefore, I will ask now for a quick reflections based on among other comments from our audience. Stefan, thank you for bringing this question, Stefan Page, on linkages between Geneva and Silicon Valley. And there are questions for our participants, panelists. Michael, the first question would be, what is the place, Stefan is asking, what is the place where he or people innovators from Silicon Valley should go to connect Silicon Valley and Geneva scene? Michael. Unmute, Michael.
Sorry.
Unmute. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, at this stage, apart from things like what you are heading, the Geneva Internet Platform and others, there isn't a sort of a substantive central place where this happens. It depends a little bit on where you come from in Silicon Valley, and then you connect with different actors. There are a number of collaborative outfits, and one of the things we haven't discussed here, which is a very fundamental basis for everything we're doing as we go forward, is the Sustainable Development Goals, the massive roadmap, global roadmap that we have on how we have to move ahead, and that actually is the operationalization of this insight that we need to work in a much more integrated way, that we can't just look at one problem and not take into all the others. You can't look at health without talking about gender, education, or development, or poverty, etc. So there are a few areas that, and a few actors that are a focal point and are kind of hubs for these kinds of things. One is an SDG lab in the UN system that is quite an extraordinary ecosystem of actors now, almost 500 different actors in this town that sit together and figure out how to implement these goals on their in a collaborative way. And this touches finance, it touches technology, it touches everything. There is, if you are an innovator, if you are somebody who's coming up, who's working on some very new technologies, then the outfit that I'm the chairman of is one called the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator. You'll find it on the net. Jovan is certainly a go-to person that will then direct you. But I guess as these conversations between actors, operational actors in Silicon Valley and here, mature and spread and become more integrated, then that question will almost answer itself. But this is a work in progress, very much so, as is evidenced by this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Here is just another illustration. I'll try to illustrate what just Michael said. What is the phone number in the Geneva, Silicon Valley, Brussels that we can call to address our digital issues? And there are many phone numbers, as Michael indicated, directory in making. Therefore, this is the first follow-up activity for Swissnex and us here in Geneva to find these bridges and to connect these dots. Now, Karen, there was
maybe add one more thought there. I think just from my perspective, I think what works best from our point of view is if you really identify a very concrete issue, a very specific issue, and then you really identify the key players in that area and you bring them together around the table. I'm a bit skeptical, and maybe just to bring a bit of energy to the discussion and maybe also for the breakouts, just having big forums where you discuss for hours might not necessarily bring breakthrough. But if you have key players in a room and committed to say we have now 2 days and we're going to work on a very concrete outcome. And it might not everybody might be participating because it's just not realistic, but you bring the most important, the big hitters, and then you just work it out and you make it happen. I think that's, from my perspective, more impactful.
Excellent. Michael has a comment on it. Go ahead, Michael.
I'll jump in very briefly on this, because I agree with Karen, of course. We need to be very operational, very focused. Let me just draw your attention to two such actors. One is sitting with us, is ICT for Peace. Daniel Stauffacher, the owner, is listening in, who do a lot of this kind of work of connecting the dots between ICT and technology with the way that we're going to apply them. Another, for example, is the Kofi Annan Foundation, where I used to work, where I'm still connected, that has done extraordinary work on how to make sure that elections are safeguarded in the digital age. Not an easy task, as we all know. So there are lots of actors that work on very specific issues, but it's not. I think that what you just said before about creating a directory is a very urgent and very important task to do on both sides. I think it would be great to have that.
Thank you, Michael. Karen, what you said is extremely important, and in the follow-up session, we'll have one discussion on the contact tracing apps. Very concrete issue. Great innovation from the Geneva Lake area, from EPFL, accepted by Apple and Google in the Bay Area, and now we have app. But countries are asking concrete questions: how to protect privacy, what are the standards, how to make sure that they have the cross-border connection. Therefore, that could be one of the idea to bring countries, businesses, civil society, academia in the room and keep them in the room till they agree about coordinated approach, triggered by this really unique interplay between Geneva area, EPFL, and the Bay Area, Apple and Google. That could be an interesting case study for you, just what you just indicated. Now, since I negotiated really hard for this extension, and I still see smiles from Joya, therefore I'm not persona non grata at Swissnex San Francisco. I would like to wrap up this discussion, but good news is that the discussion will continue in the 2 follow-up workshops, one on contact tracing apps and one extremely interesting, organized by ICT for Peace, by Anne-Marie and Daniel, on the question of envisioning a UN as if it were established today with these technological developments. Therefore, a lot of exciting, innovative, thought-provoking discussions in the next half an hour, and then Joya will bring all threads back, but we have already a few interesting threads: interpersonal, interprofessional communication, Michael mentioned, reducing lost in translation, current speed and the focus, directory, having the concrete issues and bring the actors around concrete issues. And it's really great start of today's conversation. I would like to thank you for contributing, and especially our hero, Stefan Page. That's great. Your questions are excellent. We will follow up on all of them. And without further ado, I will pass the floor to the preparations for the 2 breakout sessions. Special thanks to Michael and Karen for the lovely inputs. Thank you.
Okay, everybody slowly coming back. Wonderful. I hope you had fruitful and inspiring and hopefully some action-oriented discussions in both workshops. We will now take a few minutes to fill in a Mentimeter to hear from you a little bit what kind of thinking that might have triggered around what the role of the technology industry might be as we're actually redesigning international collaboration. But before I go there, I want to just give a quick shout out to both workshop participants, actually 3 of them. So Anna Maria Buzatu and Pavlina Itilson and Teresa, thank you all so much for designing those workshops and for leading us through these reflections. We had 2 people taking notes. So while we will actually fill in the Mentimeter, which I will give you instructions for in 1 second, they will give us the short recap of what was discussed in each of those 2 workshops. So here we have We have Nora for workshop number 1 with ICT for Peace, and Melusine for workshop number 2 with DiploFoundation. So I'll have Nora get started in just 1 second. First, I will quickly share my screen to give you the instructions for how we can get to the Mentimeter. Let me know if you can see it. Hope you can see it. So you will see up there the web link. It's www.menti.com. You will add the code 512640 to get to the question. Again, that's 512640. And here you can just ask freely your thoughts on what the contribution of the technology industry might be as we redesign, or should be actually, as we redesign international collaboration. And I will just leave this up like this while Melusine and Nora can give us the recaps, and you in the meantime can be also filling in some of your thoughts, and we will end with the word cloud that will emerge from this Mentimeter. So I'll give the word to Nora Nagy from Swissnex San Francisco on the workshop number 1. What did you discuss?
So we explored the question, if the UN was designed today with the technology available, what would it look like? And we started by acknowledging the fact that we're in the midst of a digitalization accelerated also by COVID-19. And then we asked ourselves how we can better use those tools that we already have and to collaborate effectively with each other. And there was raised a point that we already have all the tools and resources, but we don't know how to really apply them correctly. And especially regarding the UN, we face the problem of scale, because how can we really use those technology when so many governments, but also other agencies such as civil society is involved in the process. And there are also other problems arising in regards to that, like privacy concerns or who owns the data eventually. So there was the suggestion that we could use open source solutions to that, where we can collaborate more transparently with each other. But then we also had someone who said that we really need a change of culture. We need to create the ability to translate those organizational concepts and cultures into the digital age. And therefore, we need to develop and also adopt a psychological perspective as well. Eventually, we will probably need to use hybrid models, because it won't be possible just to collaborate through Zoom or other digital tools. We need physical meetings. We also briefly talked about the digital divide and how we can integrate the Global South a bit more in the conversations through using digital tools. But of course, we also see already now in the Global South that people are using those tools very innovatively and much better than in the Global West in a way, or more creatively. We also can see that we can do a democratization through technology. We can involve much more people in the process, as we've seen with the SDGs, for example. I think it was also mentioned at one point that the UN is already up to speed with technology, but at the same time, we also see a lot of negative sides by using those technologies, for example, in the humanitarian sector, but also governance issues that arise more and more. There was raised a point that there is a certain reluctance of the UN to enter the space where these discussions are really held about the issues that arise with technology, and we should really address these more normative issues and address those with the different stakeholders involved that could potentially be much more better in really addressing and solving those issues. When we move into the future, we need to incorporate the here and now was said, and also Michael Muller said something very similar. We need to shape the future together rather than that the future shapes us. And hereby I want to conclude.
Great, thank you very much, Nora, for this comprehensive overview of the discussion. That seems to have been very interesting and varied. I will pass on the word now to Melusine for workshop number 2.
Yes, so in our workshop, we started with a quick temperature check. We asked everyone what they were willing to share with their own countries in terms of information, be it name, an ID, an anonymous ID, or GPS, Bluetooth, etc. And we also looked at how this changes when it's not your own country, but another country. It was very interesting to see that all the options are actually information we already share with the governments, and to see that most people actually would rather not share those with the government, and even less with other countries. Then a very interesting point was raised on the fact that while you might know about your own countries and what exactly is data privacy and human rights in your own country, you might not be comfortable with another country having access to these informations when they might have different conception of data privacy and of human rights. We also had a very interesting input on the fact that tracing is not only the problem. We focus a lot right now on tracing because certainly we see the difference between different countries, but the situation might actually need to be fixed in other countries regardless of tracing, like human rights and data privacy may need to be addressed in a general context, not just in the context of tracing. We then realized that this data tracing app is actually becoming a source of tension between countries, because suddenly people, like, the app only works in your own country, then when you go to another country they might ask you to download the app, and then countries might start to fight with each other over that, or at least to have political tension, and that might wake up other issues. And so the importance of solving this multilateralism here is very important, because it could have a ripple effect on other issues. So Jovan made a very interesting call for someone to take the lead. He explained that he personally receives calls from countries in Africa or a Pacific Islander country asking, how do we get this app? What should we do? So there is this will. There is a desire to work together, and we are currently kind of frozen and no one is taking any action, and we're just looking at our own countries. And it's very important that there is some kind of trigger for the world to work together. And once the world can start working together, when the collaboration can be launched, we have a chance to pass it on to the UN, and then the UN can be part of the solution. So yeah, he calls all of us, and I will repeat that call to be the trigger to think about how we can start this discussion. That's it from my side.
Thank you very much, Melusine. I think we all heard the call to action. Again, I think we can have as many multilateral organisms as we want, but in the end of the day, it all takes participation, and active participation, and also initiative from different players and different actors. And that's a good segue to just a little look at our Mentimeter here. We see one word standing out, which is funding. I think that might just be because maybe one or two people, or 2 or 3 people actually put this one in there. Of course, money is always an important source to get things going. I think some other interesting words I saw in there was sort of I think something Karin mentioned very early on, the speed and focus culture, the getting things done culture, but also the human-centered culture, looking at what is it actually that humans need, and how can we make sure that we're not creating bureaucracies that forget about the individual that ultimately needs to be at the center of those conversations as well. Innovation, innovative products, the result orientation. So lots of ways that we see here that people here in this group have ideas for what the technology industry's role should be as we redesign international collaboration. And I think we can end here by hopefully agreeing across the board that a closer collaboration between the worlds of Geneva, let's say multilateralism and governments more broadly, and the Silicon Valley tech industry, and not just in Silicon Valley, but across the world, is absolutely required, as the technology industry takes such a big role in everybody's life, and digitalization has taken hold of pretty much any aspect of our lives as well. So with this, I would like to close here. I want to thank all of our speakers for their active participations. Number one, for giving us the input that triggered some thinking here, for the workshop, to the workshop facilitators as well, ICT for Peace, DiploFoundation, Michael, Karin, Jovan, who already left, but then really everybody that took part here today and was actively participating in triggering conversation and hopefully creating just the starting point for more conversations and more collaboration as well. I would also like to highlight here that Swissnex and the Consulate General of Switzerland here in San Francisco at Pier 17, right here behind me, which obviously right now is a closed location, but will hopefully reopen again, sees itself as a bridge between those two worlds. We have actively organized different types of conversations and events around this topic, and we will continue doing so, and we hope that you will all keep engaging with us. And you can rewatch this, this recording later on. We will post it, and you will also have a chance to actually look at the conversation we had yesterday in case you're interested, which is also online, which was about technologies and humanitarians. And I think some of the questions that came from Stephen, for example, Stephen Page, the silent star of today's panel. Some of those questions were actually also addressed in yesterday's panel. So I highly recommend that you look at that, which was in collaboration with the International Committee of the Red Cross. Okay, thank you, everybody. It was a true pleasure to have you all here, and all the best. And let's keep going and keeping the work up of creating our future that is a shared future for everybody. Thank you.